On August 16, 1812 AD, the United States Army surrendered Fort Detroit to the British Army and native warriors after a 2-day siege. The fort's commander and governor of the Michigan Territory, General William Hull, was still reeling from a failed invasion of Canada a month prior, was worried about a retaliatory counterattack from the British Army. Shawnee chief Tecumseh led several raids against Hull's soldiers who were trying to protect the fort's supply lines and means of communication. British General Isaac Brock, who was in the provincial capital of York, was given some of the messages that the natives managed to take during their raids. After reading them, he realized that Fort Detroit could be taken. The messages revealed that the fort was low on supplies and the soldiers' morale was low because they feared a large Indian raid was coming. On August 14th, Tecumseh and Brock met to discuss a partnership in a combined raid on Fort Detroit. The two men had an immediate rapport with each other, along with a mutual respect. Upon hearing about General Brock's scheme to take the fort, Tecumseh said about the general, "This is a man." Brock wrote about Tecumseh after meeting him. "He who attracted most of my attention was the Shawnee chief Tecumseh, brother to the prophet, who for the last 2 years has carried, contrary to our monstrances, an active warfare against the United States. A more sagacious or more gallant warrior does not, I believe, exist. He was the admiration of everyone who conversed with him." Tecumseh, with his 600 warriors, moved on to the fort later that day. Hull, with only 1,300 armed men, set out to trick the American defenders into believing that they were a much larger force marching into Detroit. On August 15th, the British Army set up an artillery battery consisting of 3 cannons and 2 mortars on the Canadian side of the Detroit River near the Francois Baby House. Brock's plan was not to only deceive the defenders, but they were going to starve them out as well by cutting off their last supply line and bombard the fort from across the river. Before the attack, he wrote a letter to Hull declaring a formal surrender of Fort Detroit. It read, "The force at my disposal authorizes me to require you the immediate surrender of Fort Detroit. It is far from my intention to join the war of extermination, but you must be aware that the numerous body of Indians who have attached themselves to my troops will be beyond their control the moment the contest commences." Tecumseh, for his part, had his warriors move consistently around the fort, purposely being seen by the U.S. soldiers on guard duty to make it look like there were hundreds of them. The British Army fired a few cannon shots toward the fort on August 16th. One of the cannonballs exploded inside the officers' barracks, killing a few soldiers. Afraid of being overrun by a large Indian force, General Hull, against the advice of his own officers, offered to surrender to Brock. Hull asked Brock if he could have 3 days to surrender the fort. He gave him 3 hours to vacate, in fear for his daughter's safety, along with the 700 civilians living inside the fort, and afraid of them being massacred by Indians. He raised the white flag. 3 hours later, General William Hull formally surrendered Fort Detroit to General Isaac Brock, and the British took from the American defenders 33 cannons, 300 rifles, 2,500 muskets, and the 6-gun brig, the USS Adams. At the time, Hull felt that surrendering to the British Army was the only option available to him because he really believed the enemy was much larger in number than they actually were, and he did not want to subject the civilians living within the fort to be massacred by the Indians. General Hull was later court-martialed for his surrendering of Fort Detroit and was convicted of cowardice and neglect of duty, and he was sentenced to death by firing squad. His death sentence was commuted by President James Madison, but he was stripped of his rank and kicked out of the U.S. Army.